choices shape the market, our society, and our quality of life. That's why Euroconsumers helps millions of people in their daily choices, providing simple solutions to complex problems. Euroconsumers is a cluster of organizations, a network of people, a group established to protect consumer rights and well-being that brings consumers and companies together in transparent relationships of trust that respect their independence. Our deep understanding of products and consumption gives consumers a credible, expert voice worldwide. We bridge the gap between buyers and manufacturers, between supply and demand. And in this digital age, we create opportunities for all parties to come together in constructive dialogue, partnering to build a future of better products and services. Euroconsumers has the power of a global group that believes humanity can develop, grow, and change for the better, and that we can promote this by uniting millions of consumers in strength and speaking responsibly for them, while simultaneously engaging in relationships of trust with responsible, sustainable companies.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to Start Talking. It's November, we're heading towards the end of the year and we've got a really interesting topic for you today. Welcome to everyone who's watching live and also to anyone who's watching a recording of this. You're all very, very welcome. So few of us think about how the nuts and bolts and cables of the internet work. In Europe, at least, we're lucky enough to be able to expect fast, reliable services that bring us search, gaming, shopping, videos, music straight into our phones and our homes. We give even less thought to how the system and network is actually funded, but that's not the case for policymakers, ISPs, and the content and application providers who create all the content that we use. Internet access is provided by ISPs, contents and services provided by a huge variety of apps and streaming services and platforms. The two need to work together to bring the digital world to consumers. And how those two sides work together is currently subject to some debate in Europe. There are some policy ideas emerging, not yet formally proposed, but emerging, which involve proposing that large online platforms contribute more to the cost of developing and maintaining the internet infrastructure. This cost currently falls on the shoulders of the telecommunications companies. Now, telcos have long argued that the cost they bear for providing internet services should be shared more fairly, especially when we have huge global tech companies and that are using the system. But does intervening in the system that most people say is delivering cost-effective internet services, it's quite controversial. Many argue it will create negative impacts, not least for consumers. But as you know, Start Talking is not afraid to dive into a controversial issue. And today we've brought together telecoms experts, platforms, a consumer organisation and a telco to discuss the issue. We're going to be looking at why Europe is considering this now in 2022. We're going to be asking why shouldn't the big companies who make up so much data traffic contribute to the system that carries it? We'll also be unpacking the idea of net neutrality and asking if the new ideas for network access fees might threaten that. And we'll also be asking what impact that would have on consumers. Would they notice? And finally, underpinning all of this is a bigger question. Who is paying and funding this immense internet system, which we all rely on so heavily now and will do even more so in the future? So I am really delighted to introduce you to a fantastic panel. First up, we have Innocenzo Genna. He's an expert in telecoms and internet regulation, former chair of ECTA, and now a strategy consultant advising on telecoms and internet regulation in Europe. He publishes lots of regular blogs and tech commentary, which I highly recommend, really clearly written and cutting through some of the topics that we're looking at today. And he's currently vice president of the European ISP Association, Vice President of the European Association of Mobile Virtual Network Operators, and previously he served as a board member for the European Internet Forum and as General Counsel for Tiscali. So welcome, Innocenzo. Next up, thank you. Next up, we have Jean-Jacques Sayel. He's been the Asia Pacific Information Policy Lead and Global Lead for Telecommunications Policy at Google since 2019. He's, sorry, can we have Jean-Jacques on screen? Thank you. We'll come to you soon, Yukyung. He oversees the issues in the region, including misinformation, online safety and intermediary liability. And prior to that, he worked at ICANN and has worked on international telecommunications policy for a variety of national governments and global companies. And he sits on the board of the International Institute of Communications. So welcome, Jean-Jacques, and thank you for joining us all the way from Perth, where I'm sure it's not a particularly sociable hour. Our third guest today is Yukyung Hu. We're really pleased that she's here. She's from Consumers Korea, which is one of the most active consumer organizations in Korea and actually globally as well. She's Director of Digital and Finance, and she specializes in consumer advocacy for data protection and financial regulation. At the moment, she's undertaking a fellowship program at the NYU School of Law in the US, and she also sits on the advisory board of Consumers International, which is the umbrella group for consumer organizations all across the world. And our fourth guest today on the panel is Gonzalo Lopez Barajas. He's head of corporate regulatory affairs at Telefonica. He has a degree in telecoms engineering, master's in business management from ESAD, a certified European financial analyst, and he has over 20 years experience at Telefonica. So he's bringing some really in-depth knowledge of the regulatory and technical issues that we're going to be discussing today. So welcome everyone, a truly great panel and a lot of knowledge and insight here together. So we're going to kick off by getting into the issue, and I'm going to turn now to Innocenzo to make some opening remarks. So Innocenzo, 10 years ago, many felt that this question of access fees and the impact on net neutrality had been put to bed. It's now arisen again in the context of the European digital decade. Can you set the scene for us a bit? What ideas are now in play, and why is this whole question subject to such strong feelings? Thank you.
Okay, so welcome everybody. We are talking about a political request whereby larger online platform should be obliged to fund telcos, in the case European telcos, to finance the rollout of fiber network in Europe. Could be local access network, transportation. This is still to be finalized. And this reflects the idea that those OTT are doing a good business thanks to the networks of the telcos, which in fact connect the services of the OTT to the customers, which are attached to the local loop of the network operators. So this is the scene. And this is exactly more the same request that we had in 2012, which was rebutted years at the time, especially because at that time the discussion was more about freedom and neutrality rather than a matter of economy. I mean, at that time, the online operators were considered to be the guardians of the freedom in the net. You remember there was the period of the Spring Revolution and so on. 10 years after, I would say that the reputation of online platform is a bit obscurated for various reasons. And therefore, maybe this is one of the reasons why this debate is coming back. Besides that, you have to consider that the gap between telcos and OTT is increasing in financial terms for various reasons. And in fact, this is the main political way we can approach this problem. Because if we just stay on the concept that OTT should pay because they are alleged to consider to use the networks of the telco operators, this is a very controversial approach because the technical community does not share this approach. This is the reason why BEREC, for instance, has issued a preliminary assessment which is very negative. The technical community believes that when the network is transporting a service is because the clients of the network operator are asking for that services. It's not the OTT which is asking for that. And this is why the confrontation can be very hard. And this is why maybe a more large political approach is needed. We have to consider this problem starting from an internet ecosystem in which OTT and telcos are complementary. They need each other because the OTT needs a way to connect to the users to sell their services, and the telcos needs the OTT to justify the bidding up of the networks. That's the way we have to discuss.
Thank you. And I think your connection is pretty good, but there's a couple of bits there that we cut out on, so we might come back to you again. And is there a difference between the perspectives of telcos on this, between, say, the larger and smaller?
Yes, there is a difference, as the difference is that there might be some larger telcos that they can see an opportunity to make more money, of course. While other telcos, they are not interested in this, but they are worried that that money is not used for investments. It can be used for whatever reason. It can be used just to make a company financially stronger, or to use such money to make predatory prices. As far as we don't have clear rules about the way such additional money, if any, will be used, then there will be worries by a part of the telecom sector that this money is not used for investment, may be used to distort competition. And I would say that on this point, the proponents of the fair share doctrine are a bit vague. So they say, yes, we need this money for investments. They say it clearly, but then when you ask, do you want to commit in a mechanism which makes sure that this money does not go directly to your budget and then is used in whatever way, but it is used in a way that it is spent where really investments are needed, then the things are less clear. And this is why some part of the telecom market is worried.
Thank you, Innocenzo. And obviously some of the points you've made there, I will give the other panelists an opportunity to come back on. I just wanted to go back a step really and ask Jean-Jacques to tell us a little bit about how the internet works. And that sounds a really big question, but as you know, most of us use it and don't really think about it. But can you do a brief outline of how me as a consumer gets the internet? And can you touch on this idea of net neutrality and how it relates to the proposal and the ideas?
So I will try to do that in 3 minutes, which will be interesting. So look, what has become the internet was born in the 60s, and the basic principle was to have a very stable system, and a system that could allow for people to exchange very easily. So the basic of it is something called the Internet Protocol. And basically you've got a network, and a network can be a cable, or it can be accessed through wireless, for your mobile. And basically these networks connect to each other, talk to one another, thanks to this thing called the Internet Protocol. And once you connect those networks, anyone who is connected to that network has got access to the whole of this network of networks that makes up the internet. Nowadays, there's, I think, over 14,000 of those networks worldwide. What that means in practice is that as a user connected to the internet, we can both send and receive information just as long as we pay access to the internet. And we do that as a consumer by buying a fixed or a mobile subscription to access the internet from a telecom operator. Why do we do that? We do that because we want to access the the wealth of information and content that is available online, or indeed we might want to contribute ourselves, expressing ourselves on the internet, posting our own videos, and that's how the internet works. So in theory, if you're connected like I am in Australia right now to the internet, I should be able to exchange, as I do right now, with anyone else who's connected to the internet, whether it's in the UK or Italy or in the US or Korea. And that's the beauty of the internet, is that it's an open system where, as long as you are paying for access to this internet, you're able to communicate with anyone else connected to this network of networks. And so the way it works is that a consumer, user of the internet, requests access to a certain type of information and content. Right? For instance, we might enter a web address, www.something, to access a particular website. That query goes through our internet access provider, our telecom operator, who then interrogates the rest of the internet and eventually gets to that particular website. Now, historically, 20, 30 years ago, that website might have been, say, in California, for instance. And so the data would have traveled all the way to, that query from the consumer would have traveled all the way to California, found the servers of, say it was Yahoo at the time, back in the 90s, for those of us that remember it, and we would have brought back that data. Yahoo would have allowed that data to flow back in response to the consumer's query, and we would have received it in hopefully a matter of a few seconds. Mm-hmm. Obviously, things go much faster now, and it goes faster also because what's been happening is that we've reduced the time it takes for the content to go. What happens in practice today, and that's accelerated in the last 10 or 15 years, is that those internet companies have increasingly invested to bring their content much closer to consumers. So nowadays, if you're requesting data from, say, Google, say YouTube, for instance, more than likely, your query, say that you're in the UK, more than likely, your query will not go all the way to California. It'll go to a server in the UK that's very close to you, in many cases hosted at the premises of your telecom operator, because a lot of those videos will be already there in data centers or in what we call colocation and what we call or caches, which are sort of local storage of data. And so that movement over the past few years, thanks to the internet companies, has meant that we've been able to deliver much better experience to the end user. So we've seen an improvement in the underlying network. So all the work that the telecom operators do, upgrading to things like fiber, to 3G, to 4G, to 5G now increasingly, that means that we can get, in theory, the internet much faster, but then there's all the work of those content companies to bring that content closer as well. So we as users make that query and we get that content so much faster. Now, what is net neutrality? Very briefly, it's simply back to this basic principle of the openness of the internet. Once I'm connected to the internet, I should be able to access any resource, any information available anywhere in the globe, as long as it's connected to the internet. And in return, I should be able to myself express myself and distribute my information, my content, anywhere else in the world. So in other terms, the principle has been coined, generally speaking, as end user or consumer's choice and ability to access and distribute the content and services of their choice on the internet. So it's the freedom to access the information we want as consumers.
And so if that principle didn't exist, how would I notice? How would I know as a consumer if net neutrality was being breached or not observed?
You would simply not be able to access the content you want. So you might enter the web address for a particular website that you're wanting to go to, and simply you would get an error message that says you cannot access that website. Or you might want to access to use an app. Say a few years ago, we had the sad reality for people who wanted to use some online video calling, for instance, like Skype. It was blocked by certain network operators, and so you could start your app, but then you weren't able to call the other person. The data just wouldn't flow, right? So that's how you would notice, in short.
So it's very noticeable then, what you're saying. And presumably as a regular consumer, there wouldn't be very much I could do about that.
You might want to, so say you take the case of Skype. So that happened a lot for some of the mobile operators at the time. So what you might have had to do is that you would have to wait, for instance, to be back home and use your fixed access to the internet from another provider that allowed you to access that resource. But indeed, you might be stuck if you're in, for instance, a 12-month contract.
Right. Okay. So this is not just a technical principle issue of the open internet. This could have real impacts, and consumers wouldn't be able to do very much about it. Okay, I think we'll go now to Gonzalo. So Gonzalo, you're from Telefonica, and Etno, the umbrella group which represents telcos in Europe, is very supportive of some kind of remuneration for the investment and maintenance of the infrastructure that supports our world. Could you briefly sketch out why you feel it's so important at this time?
Sure. Thanks for having me here. It's really a pleasure. So basically, the problem here is that internet traffic in Europe has been growing by 32% every year for the last 10 years. And the sector revenues, the telecom revenues, have been pretty much declining flat or declining 1% per year. So in order to cope with the traffic increase, we have to keep doing investments, and we have no revenues linked to those investments. So basically, there's a problem of the sustainability of investments and the profitability of the network investments that we are doing. And this is in a context that we will have to cope with the current 30% increase in demand. And also, we are expecting that the new services like those based on the metaverse could further induce a moderate adoption of the metaverse, could further drive traffic increases up another 30%. So that would mean that in 10 years' time, the traffic that is routed would be 20 times the traffic that is routed today. And that's in a context in Europe where we also have to meet the digital path targets, connectivity targets of the European Union, which are quite ambitious, at which the sector has already indicated that there is a gap of 300 billion considering current investment trends in order to meet those targets. And on the other hand, we also have a few internet companies that are responsible for more than 50% of that traffic. So around 6 companies represent more than 55% of the internet traffic in Europe. And they have a business model where basically the more traffic that they put, the higher revenues that they get. So as I said, the telco sector has been having a 1% decline in revenues for the last 10 years. And for example, these companies in Europe were having an increase of revenues around 22% per annum. So this environment where both content providers and telecom providers were having a mutual beneficial relationship is no longer the case anymore. Basically, we're having the more traffic we route, we have more expenses and our margins are pressure, and the more traffic that they route, they're having more revenues. So that's why we are asking that this should somehow has to be addressed, and that's why we are claiming that these content providers should pay for the service of delivering their traffic to our end customers. And that's basically our claim here, that in order for networks to be sustainable and to be able to keep the quality demanded by our customers and the future investments in the networks, we will have to charge these content providers for this service.
Okay, so consumers want to move. There's great services out there. Consumers want more and more of them. We're likely to see that grow. That puts a strain on the network, and we need to develop that, and that needs to be paid for somehow. And very broadly put, you feel there's that the OTT services need to contribute to that. I just want to go now to Yu Kyung, who is, as I said in the introduction, from Consumers Korea. Now, South Korea is one of the few places where network usage fees or the sending party network pays system are active. So it'd be great if you could tell us just a bit more about that. And I know the case that sparked the national legislation on this was one between a telco in South Korea and Netflix. So could you explain a bit more and give us a picture of what's happening in Korea?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to this super interesting discussion. So to give a little bit of background of what's happening in Korea. So domestic content providers actually already pay something that we call network usage fees to our domestic internet service providers. So technically in Korea, net neutrality is already dead. It's categorized as a country that doesn't have net neutrality. And what happens in Korea is so Netflix and Google, actually these global content providers take up about 30% of internet traffic, and so the local internet service providers argue that this is the traffic surge is causing an increase in costs, similar to what our previous speaker said. So the SK, the internet service providers, since 2018, started negotiations asking Netflix to shoulder at least some part of the surge for traffic for this and provide some funds for the global internet network. And in 2020, Netflix filed a lawsuit against SK, saying that it had no obligation to pay SK, and citing rules like net neutrality and such. So in 2021, the district court ruled that Netflix has to pay the SK, the Korean ISP, some remuneration in some form, but the court actually doesn't define like how much or in what form Netflix should pay. So the what Netflix pays, it could actually be in some form of investment, for example, building up the internet infrastructure. It doesn't have to be in monetary compensation. So that's kind of the backdrop. And right now, the court, both parties appealed the case, and it's the court is at the second instance. So the higher court is deciding it. But this court case actually sparked a huge debate in Korea, that a lot of Korean legislators found that this was unfair, that the Korean content providers were paying up this network usage fees, but in fact, these global content providers are not paying anything according to their arguments. So and they're arguing that the global CPs, content providers, are causing a huge outflow of Korean national wealth. It's a free riding on domestic networks. These are what the national legislators are saying, and they submitted 7 bills, which is it's nicknamed the Networks Free Ride Prevention Act, and it's currently actively being discussed in Korean legislators, Korean National Assembly. So, but it's a very active space. So just I see congressional reports coming out just yesterday or just a couple of days ago. And so first, there was a bipartisan support for the bill, for this network usage fee bill. But just recently, a lot of more government departments are changing, or they're forming their opinions, and it's being published. It's been published publicly, and it's interesting to see that the KCC, the Korean telecom regulator, is in favor of the bill, whereas the Ministry of Science and ICT is against the bill. So they argue that this is a matter of freedom of contract between the ISPs and the CPs. It's not for the government to mandate a network usage fee. And also the Korean FTC, the monopolies competition regulator, also says that we can deal with these issues in our Korean Fair Trade Acts and other acts. So it really doesn't merit a different legislation on this topic. And the legislative report actually concludes that this issue actually needs a second look, because it could cause other issues, for example, trade issues with the US, and the Korean CPs might be required to pay up more. And so yeah, basically I think the legislation will be stalled. It won't pass very quickly as we initially thought so.
Thank you. So you're seeing that this is attracting just as much many different perspectives and arguments as we're seeing here. And you work for a consumer organization, obviously. Do you think that people are paying enough attention to the impact on consumers? I know that there's been, the impact on industry and creators, etc. But are people thinking about how this is really going to affect people as consumers?
Sure. So that's actually one thing that I find puzzling as a consumer organization. We look at so there's a lot of talk about how these rules, this legislation will affect innovation, creativity, but there is really no data out there regarding like how, for example, how much the CP's high volume traffic costs, how much the ISPs are losing money as a result, and ultimately how these allocation of costs will be passed on the consumer. So we really don't know what are the exact economic impacts on the consumers. And I find that the debate is, so the ISPs and the CPs, they kind of like, they take over the debate, and the consumer's voice or the consumer's concerns are really not at the table in the Korean legislative discussion at this point. So we would like to see more empirical data, how this will actually affect maybe consumers of both these content providers and both the consumers of the internet service providers. Are we going to see a surge of costs on both sides? Are we going to see like deteriorating quality of the services? So that really isn't well explained to the Korean consumers at this point.
Thank you. That's a really useful perspective. I'm going to come to some of the other panelists now. So I think this is picking up on the question of the impact on consumers and the evidence for that. So Innocenzo, you wanted to come in here.
Yes, I mean, there might be a potential risk for consumers, but still, I think we should not anticipate it, because as long as we don't have a concrete example of what will be the mechanism whereby OTT will be eventually charged, then we cannot evaluate. As regards net neutrality could be violated if this charging system has a result that OTT and telcos makes an agreement in a way that they favor some OTT services and restrict the access to other. And this could be done not only by charges, but by differentiated the quality of the bandwidth. But as far as I know, until now, this is not the discussion. The discussion is only to charges on services, but the quality of the bandwidth should be provided in the same way, so the best effort for everyone. Or if we use a specialized bandwidth, that should be given at non-discriminatory terms. So if the situation stays like that, well, I would not say immediately that net neutrality is violated, but let's see how it is. I think the possible impact on consumers are an increase of retail charges. This could be because it is clear that when the colleague of Telefonica is saying that there are a lot of investments to do, I would ask, but why you don't increase the prices? I will say, because in this market it's difficult to increase the prices, so we want the OTT to increase the prices. Okay. I can say something which is unpopular now. I would not make a revolution if the prices of consumer increase a lot, because they are increasing everywhere. They can also increase there. But it is a matter of transparency, probably. Probably the worst could be a lack of quality and security. And this is what can happen if you look at the South Korean case, because I see that because of this charging mechanism, operators are not exchanging traffic any longer in South Korea, but they are exchanging traffic outside of Korea in order to avoid the charging mechanism, so that Netflix does not distribute the signal in Korea. They bring it to Japan, and then the Korean operator have to Japan and take it back. And the result is that the video services is distorted, has to make a longer route, and therefore it is more attackable by hackers. There is less security, and also the quality can vanish. That will be, a consequence. And in general, I would say that also if there are distortion of competition, this could be indirectly a bad consequence for consumers, because if you have less competition in the market and more consolidation, as you know, this does not mean automatically that you have more investment. This means that you have less offers, less choices, and this could be bad for consumers.
Thank you. So there's some direct consumer impacts there, and then some more indirect ones from the market. I'd like to come back to Yu Kyung again. So Innocenzo mentioned some of the practical impacts in Korea. Can you tell us a bit more about the reality for consumers? I know we've talked before about gamers, and what's been the impact of it for consumers?
Sure. So the way I see it, looking at what's going on online on YouTube, YouTube videos, comments, or domestic CPs videos, comments, news medias, and their comments, and a lot of things are happening online. We can see. So a lot of public opinion is being formed currently on both sides. But what we're seeing is that consumers are actually being, what I see it as, threatened by both the content providers and the Korean internet service providers. So a recent event, a couple of events actually happened. So on September 29th, it's called like the day that internet went slow in Korea for Twitch, which is an online popular game streaming platform in Korea. I think it's a arm of Amazon. That's what I've read. So the Twitch actually dropped its maximum video quality in Korea from 1080p to 7020p, and that got a lot of online gamers, the gaming industry, really angry, because that was a really important day for some esports events that they were looking forward to. And Twitch didn't really say that this was because of the ongoing discussions on the Korea network usage bill, but it did mention in a statement that about continuously rising costs, and it needed a new solution for its operations. But there was a lot of speculation in the local media and in the communities that this is because Korean legislators are actually discussing this bill, which will negatively affect these content providers, such as Twitch. And on a related note, the Google YouTube representative in Korea or Asia Pacific, I'm not really sure, but he stated in publicly that it may need to change the way it operates in Korea. So they don't really go into the details of what that means, like how the change in operations might mean, but we can guess that it's some sort of increase of costs or deterioration of quality or less investments in Korea. We don't really know. But these series of events and like statements actually terrified a lot of people on the internet. We're thinking that, okay, the Korean internet is going to be shut down. We can't see YouTube anymore. We can't have any more baby shark YouTubes, viral videos that we can send Korean contents across the globe. A lot of fear out there, and there are online petitions that are operating, that are gathering political opinions about like arguing against the bill. But so in Korea, there is a proverb that says that when whales fight, a shrimp's back gets broken. So what I see is the Korean consumers are in fact shrimps in this big fight of whales, big telecom companies and big tech companies. And we really don't want to see that type of situation happening both here in Korea and elsewhere in the world.
Thank you. That's great. And I love a proverb. And I think that's a really evocative image there. So I would like to bring Gonzalo back in So how would you respond to that? How would you reassure consumers that proposals to change the way that things are funded won't affect them negatively? It would actually be a good thing. What would you say to consumers?
Are you referring to the net neutrality issue, or just a more general concern on the user and on consumers?
On the net neutrality, and actually, if you could take both, that would be helpful.
Okay.
So if you could say net neutrality first. I mean, first of all, do you think net neutrality will actually be impacted by the ideas that Netflix put forward?
That's precisely my point. According to the definition that Jean-Jacques mentioned on net neutrality, this proposal won't affect net neutrality. In fact, charging for a wholesale service to a third party is not really affecting net neutrality. We are not changing the quality of the connections. We're not blocking the access to the content. So consumers will not perceive any change in their connection. There will be no blocking, no throttling, no differential treatment of traffic. So we just pretend to charge for the traffic conveyance service for this traffic to be delivered, and there will be no harms on the user rights, neither any differential treatment of the traffic. So net neutrality won't be affected at all. And in fact, we already have some statements from the European Commission replying to a letter on that behalf, saying that this could affect net neutrality. And the European Commission said that they are very proud of the net neutrality rules in Europe, and they are fully committed to that those are a high standard for the rest of the world, and that they are not going to let anything threaten net neutrality. And also they think that this fair share initiative is a completely different discussion, and it's not affecting net neutrality. So that's on the one side. And on the other, on the consumer, I think that as I said before, if we are not able to increase prices, then our investments are going to be affected, and we won't be able to keep the quality, and we won't be able to provide the services that these content providers want to provide to the consumers. So at the end, consumers will be affected. So we need to find a solution to this return on investments, so that we have some profitability on these network investments. So we have two options. I would say that we could either increase prices to consumers, or since we are in a two-sided market, as for example, most of the internet-based model where, for example, Airbnb charges the people renting the houses and the people putting the houses in the market, or the application stores that may charge both the people buying the applications and the application developers. So in this two-sided market, we think that content providers could also participate and have a share and pay for the service they're receiving. And that's what we are aiming.
Okay, I'd like to bring Jean-Jacques back in here. What do you think of that point that this is a two-sided market, and also into what Gonzalo said earlier, that your traffic's going up, your revenue's going up, and doesn't that then logically lead to you contributing more? I'd like your thoughts on that.
I think normally, if you think about private companies, they generally like it when there's more consumer demand for their products, and that's what we're seeing. The consumers want more access to the internet because they want access to content and services. So yes, that generates traffic. Now, what is the reality? The reality is that traffic growth has been declining slowly. Okay, over the past 20 years, it used to be that internet traffic would grow by 100%, if not more, every year. It's slowly gone down, and in fact, it's not 30% over the past decade. It's now at levels of 35 down to 20%, depending on the country. So traffic growth is decreasing, and at the same time, the cost of running the networks and the cost of carrying that traffic have gone down. In part, it's because of the dynamism of the international market for internet exchanges, internet interconnection. And I think it's also important to note that it's because we've got ways to bring the traffic to consumers that have vastly improved. There's a report that's just come out a month ago that shows that internet companies have invested close to $900 billion US, so not far from 900 billion euros, over the past 10 years in bringing that traffic closer to the users. So we get better user experience, and it costs much less for telecom operators because they don't have to get the traffic from far away. On top of which, we like a few of the other internet companies work regularly with telecom operators. We help them with technology to help optimize how they run their networks, how they run their services, so they can optimize them, save money, and also even find new sources of revenue. So actually, we do think that there is that sort of complementary ecosystem here that still works very much, as Innocenzo was saying at the beginning. And at the end of the day, there was a quote earlier that made me sick, which was, the more traffic generated, the more revenues. That's not actually true. We don't want to generate a lot of traffic. We want to provide the content and services that consumers want at the best quality possible for them. If a consumer gets a bad experience, they're not going to like our product. And so if there is too much traffic out there, it might slow down the way that traffic is delivered to the user, so they won't have a good experience, they won't enjoy our service. So it's not in our interest to have that bad service. So it doesn't actually add up. And I think it's important to note, this is not the first time we hear these arguments, sadly. The same arguments, the same proposals were made 10 years ago. And 10 years ago already, every single stakeholder groups, bar a handful of companies, agreed that we should not go ahead with those proposals, that there is no free riding as it's known, that the network should continue to grow and should be able to absorb the increase in traffic, and that we should continue with this, this virtuous cycle where consumers get great service and applications, they continue to pay for internet access, that provides revenues for telecom operators, and there continues to be innovation across the board. The regulators in Europe, BEREC, have just come out with a report, again in October, that says exactly the same thing, that there is no free riding, that the networks are growing at the right pace and should be able to absorb traffic growth, and that the proposals to charge will be very detrimental. And now let's just finish on the last aspect, which is the threat to net neutrality. Net neutrality is the ability for the user to access any kind of content on an equal footing. The moment you start charging certain services, but not others, then you are discriminating between different services. So you are completely breaching net neutrality. Or is the proposal to maybe charge all the services so that they're all treated equally and they're all charged? So if it's not just the big tech companies, the telecom operator should come out and say it very clearly, no, they're going to charge everyone that's got an online presence according to how much traffic they've got on the internet. They should make that clear. Either way, what happens if you don't pay? Are you going to be blocked by telecom operators? Is your traffic going to be degraded? I think we can go ahead through a range of scenarios, and they're not pretty, and I don't think they help anyone, including the telecom operators. So I think we need to move away from those discussions and just think a bit more about how we can all work together rather than against each other.
Okay, so I'm going to give Gonzalo a chance, obviously, to come back on those points, and then I do want to move to talking about how we can work on this more constructively, because there's obviously big divisions in opinion. So, but Gonzalo, just to come back then on Jean-Jacques' points.
Yeah, okay. So on the BEREC report, this BEREC report, they have not made any further data analysis. So they are basically based on their previous findings from 2012 and 2015. And they say that internet traffic growth remains the same. So nothing has changed from those trends. So there's nothing to be fixed. So I wonder to what extent an industry can sustain a 30% growth in demand without any increase in revenue. So, I mean, could we look at any industry that can deal with that? I would say that you can find not one example. On the issue that the more traffic, the more revenues. For example, streamers like Netflix, they have higher fees for when they deliver 4K content. So that means more traffic, that means more revenues. Also for the streamers on Twitch, on YouTube, That means that when they stream more content, they stream more advertising, and that more revenues for them. So it's not that you want to increase the capacity, but it means that you're generating more revenues either on the ads or either on the subscriptions because you're providing higher quality and increasing the traffic. So I think that there is a situation where we're having more traffic and we're having less profitability, and that's something to be solved. And what we're aiming is basically would be to those content generators that exceed, for example, a threshold in a capacity of our networks, for example, 5%. So we would be charging them. So it would be like related to their dominant position in the market. So that would be affecting just the higher companies, and so that smaller companies are able to innovate, and we will remain capturing, most of the cost by just charging these companies that exceed a certain threshold.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to turn now to Innocenzo, and this is a sort of wider point about how we deal with these debates where you've got some quite entrenched views on different sides. So would you agree there's even a problem with defining what the problem is, and also how we're measuring things and what evidence we're using? And then secondly, how can we move this debate on in a more constructive way? What would you like to see the Commission doing as it takes forward these ideas?
Well, yes, the debate is a bit confused, and even now this exchange of comments about the neutrality shows it, because probably even what is the neutrality, what is neutral, there is no clear unified opinion on what is it, because Gonzalo says there is no differentiation of bandwidth and so on, so everything is fine. Jean-Jacques say no. Anytime you charge a service, there will be a risk. Even the idea that the telecom is a two-sided market is potentially risky, because if you say that, provided it is correct, I'm not sure, but if you say that the telecom operator is just intermediating between users and over the top on the others, then you risk that then you say that telecom operator is making choices which can influence the options for the user to get access to the internet. So there is some clarity there, but as I said at the beginning, unclarity. As I said at the beginning, we have to wait for what will be the practical mechanism proposed, if any, and then probably will be easier then to make an analysis and assessment and evaluate whether there is a concrete risk for net neutrality and in general for the interest of end users. As the way to go forward, we know that there is a questionnaire which will be probably launched before Christmas, and then there will be a consultation. I think that the Commission should be, in this moment, a bit more clear, a bit more transparent and objective, because even if I've been meeting various officers of the Commission who told me we are still analyzing, studying, there is nothing to be decided, but then you see the declaration of Breton, which create a lot of confusion, alarm, and panic, because Breton also, because it's coming from the telecom sector, so is perceived as someone who probably his heart is a bit on the side of a part of the industry, not for the others. So I would say that either you don't say nothing, or you clearly make a declaration saying what you want to do. Mm-hmm. So this is where the Commission is a bit failing, because they just make few interventions. The few interventions they do are creating panic and speculations on what could really happen. So that should stop.
Thanks. Yeah, no, the interesting perspective. And Jean-Jacques, you appeal to move it in a more constructive way. How do you think that could start to happen?
Well, I mean, I think we haven't had a proper debate, to be frank, right? So there's been some research published earlier, but there hasn't been that much of an exchange and a look at the detailed questions and problems that there might be. There's very loose definitions of problems. There's arguments flying about. It would be really interesting to actually have very thoughtful, evidence-based discussions. If there are problems with investment in networks, not sufficient investment in networks, we should look at that. We should look at where are the blockers. If there are concerns about, as I've heard in other settings, for instance, about how traffic is being sent, that it's not done in a thoughtful manner, for instance, by some communities, etc. Let's look at very practical ways to make it easier, smoother, so that, because I think at the end of the day, whatever we say, I think all of us have got an interest in consumers having a good internet experience, right? So I think it's those sorts of discussions that need to be had to try and dig a little bit deeper than the sort of very high level lobbying messages that we've heard, and to see if there are genuine problems, what are they? And these exchanges haven't really happened, right? We haven't had thoughtful exchanges and conversations. I think this is one of the first few. We need to have more public exchanges and independent research. And I think a point that is obvious from this conversation, but I think Innocenzo was alluding to it in a way. If we're going to have surveys, if we're going to have consultations, let's make sure that we have all the relevant stakeholders involved. And the stakeholders in here are not just a handful of big tech and a handful of telecom companies. In fact, I think that's reducing the debate, and it's not a fight between big tech and telcos, because actually companies like ours work a lot with telcos, and we don't see a problem. We haven't heard that there was a problem until we had some of those lobbying statements. So I think we need to have discussions with consumer groups involved, with the range of organizations that are active on the internet, from broadcasters to maybe even governments themselves who are digitizing rapidly. And we need to have all those voices there and considering what are the right options for society, if indeed there are problems.
Okay. And I think I would like to say as well, just to everybody, we do really appreciate you coming and taking part in this panel, because, as I said, there is controversy around it and it is a very hot issue. So we do appreciate your open and frank contributions, everyone. I'm going to leave the final word with you, Kyung, because having seen this issue and the debates and all these ideas about the different stakeholders and the different impacts, having seen that firsthand in Korea, if you were advising the European Commission on how to approach this, I'd just be really interested to get your take on what you'd tell them.
Thank you. So I would hardly be in a position to advise the European Commissions, but just my observations, just looking at this debate, is it's a really highly technical debate, and it's difficult for consumer organizations, just everyday consumers, just engaging in the debate. But I would like to note that consumers actually shouldn't be burdened by the technicalities of the industry, how the industry allocates its costs. If we take, for example, a smartphone, we don't need to know how much the 5G chips cost, or we don't know the cost of labor or whatever that goes into the phone. We just want to trust the market system. We want to trust our governments, and we to have like a good quality phone in our hands. And also, I would like to note that consumers should not have to be burdened of the cost of innovation. So what we see is that innovation is expensive. It creates costs for consumers. So what we see in Korea, the 5G internet rollout was really not good. So we see more expensive data plans and consumers that were not really happy about the coverage. So we should think of ways how to make innovation, creativity more inclusive for all the consumers, not just a certain segment of consumers, not just the creator community, not just the gamer community, but all the consumers, to look at how it impacts the different groups of society that these innovation and technology brings to us.
That's great, thank you. And I think that idea of what is innovation and what is consumer-focused innovation is a really interesting one. So I'm going to bring it to a close now. I'd like to thank everybody for coming, and as I say, for being so open in your ideas and your discussions. And to everyone watching, thank you very much for joining us. And the session will be available recording on YouTube and LinkedIn and on Spotify. And next month, just in time for Christmas, we are going to put out a wrap-up of this year's Start Talking, where me and my Euroconsumers colleagues will pick our favourite clips from all the different webinars we've had. So we've looked at crypto, influencers, class actions, anonymity, disinformation, the metaverse. So we'll be putting together a little end-of-year treat and to tell you and showcase some of the work we've been doing. I'd also like to mention Euroconsumers International Forum, which is happening in Lisbon next month. Well, we'll be looking at the idea of post-deglobalization. So we're retreating back to national borders, what does that mean for consumers and consumption relations, and how is the world changing, and what impact does that have on consumers? And there's a fantastic lineup of sessions and panels there. So you can watch that for free and follow online, or you can come in person to Lisbon if you email and visit the website. So thanks once again to Jean-Jacques, to Gonzalo, to Inocenzo, and to Yu Kyung. Thank you to Luca behind the scenes who makes all this happen. And thank you for all debating this. And we'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.